Oh, hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, I haven't said anything. Can you hear me now? Oh, interesting. Wait, am I repeating? Oh, it might be because of this. Let me hear what I sound like. Am I still repeating? Oh, we have two people. Well, maybe that includes me. I'm still repeating? Hmm, what's going on here? I mean, these are both muted. Oh, okay. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so I will ping now people in my server, get the link. In the meantime, while we wait for the others, how are you doing, buddy? Doing well? All right, good to hear that. 4th of July is interesting. Long conversation, but I see. That's too bad. Do we have anyone else in the chat? Yo, is there someone else in the chat? Oh, I hope it doesn't get blurry. It seems there's a problem here. Okay, whatever. I'll just start. Hopefully the others join. Okay. So let's just get this started right away because we're gonna try to make it a bit longer. And also we still have two-thirds left, so okay, thanks for inviting some people. Hi. Oh, looks like we got third person now. See who it is. Okay. All right, let's get started. I will now open presentation. Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of context, just in case you missed it last time. So essentially, this is a live stream that I am doing where I'm going to be showcasing the different kinds of traditional clothing in the world. And so this isn't the full presentation. The full presentation is around 1,750 slides, but obviously that's too much to present on YouTube. So instead, I've just showed the best examples from each different culture and style. And how this works basically is I start out by explaining, the general, um, the I guess the general features of that style of clothing, and then I let you guys see examples of it, and that's basically what we're doing. So last time we covered European, um, North African, West Asian, Central Asian, South Asian, and East Asian clothing. And so now we are moving on to Southeast Asia. So actually, we're just gonna move this here. Okay. So let's get this out of the way. All right. So just before I start, can you guys all hear me okay? All that stuff? If it's all good, just write okay in the chat and then let's start. Okay, awesome. So let's get started. Okay, so we're starting off here with Northeast Indian clothing, which is distinct because while it resembles Southeast Asian clothing, it has distinct features. Like most women, of course, Northeast Indian women would wear skirts, but what made them distinct is that it was not uncommon to see calf length or even ankle length skirts. These were known as sarongs, which is a large fabric worn around the waist that is usually ankle length and is often checkered. Among Northeast Indians specifically, red was a color that was nearly universally used and was often paired with black and white, with a white shirt being pretty common and white or black stripes on the skirt. One thing that was unique only to this group was the distinctive headgear worn by women, which had upright feathers or sticks with soft and puffy material. Men often would go shirtless, or they would wear a shirt, but for the lower garment, they wouldn't cover their lower legs, instead opting for a loincloth or a knee-length skirt. Also, no footwear would be worn by either gender. So that was a lot, so let's look at some examples. Okay, so first we have the Garo people, right? So this is what I was talking about, right? Shorter skirt, the feathers in the hair over there. I find this to be one of my favorite pictures. I mean, it's obviously like a very, prepared, staged kind of photograph, but it looks pretty nice. So props to Pixel something for taking this picture. We have the Imol, right? So they're wearing, I don't even know what these are called, mini pom-poms, I guess, around their feet and then also on their head. Khoi Rang. Again, once again, notice in each of these cases the head, right? So they're wearing this little thing on their head, all these little pom-pom things. And again, the color red is something you will continue seeing throughout presentation, at least among Northeast Indians, and the striped pattern. Chakma, this is another one of my favorite pictures. Um, Very high quality, photographer. And again, once again, we have the stripes and these little things. Now, these look like feathers from what I can tell. I'm not exactly sure, but we see that all three of these ladies are all wearing feathers and a whole lot of necklaces too. You can see that here among the Garo as well. A lot of, yeah, very nice necklaces. Okay. Then we got the Purum. Again, same sort of deal, just the stripes, the necklaces. They aren't wearing anything unique on their head, but they're sort of an exception here. Tangkul. So yeah, this is sort of some kind of beaded thing, not exactly sure what it is. But you see the man wearing the loincloth, and woman has a lot of, I think these are some kind of rings. And again, red, red, red with the stripes. Keep seeing that pattern. Red with the stripes. Okay, we have the Kooky people, which is one of the funniest names I've heard. And so he's wearing shorts. But yeah, once again, this kind of headgear we continue seeing. Also, yeah, you might notice, right? I call these group Northeast Indians, but in terms of like racially, they're generally more East or Southeast Asian in terms of, yeah, the race. So that is the predominant, you know, I guess, race in northeastern India, as other than like somewhere like Assam. Okay, the Paite, now again, very great photographer. But yeah, once again, we see these little things here in the hair, uh, the use of the color red, and again, the stripes. So we continue seeing all the stripes being worn here. Vai Fei, again, same thing with the little, you know, sticks and feather things on their head. Once again, we see the color red. Once again, we see the stripes. The Zoo, same thing, right? Mizo people, so they are, I think, the majority in the state of Mizoram, so I think it's named after them. And it looks very similar. Well, I mean, there are similarities with the Zoo, the Vaifei, but yeah, it looks very similar to the Paite people and the Koireng. And so we can see, right, all very similar cultures. Um, so again, the stripe pattern, once again, the little things in the head. Jingpo, this is always one of my favorite pictures here. And yeah, again, red, shorter skirt, pretty thick necklace, a lot of jewelry here. So this is probably the best example I could find here. So this is a full, probably like foot of just this little headgear thing with all the little thingies on their head. Again, not sure what they're called. And yeah, we can see very clearly the sarong. You can see it's sort of wrapped around, starts here and then wraps around over here. And again, main color, once again, red with a more white top. Baum people, same thing, same color, same kind of stripes. Darlong, so this is actually a thumbnail for one of my videos. So if somehow you remember any of my videos from like 6 years ago, that's who represents the Darlong people. We can see again the man's not wearing any shirt. He is wearing either some sort of loincloth or shorts. It's hard to see. And she's not wearing any headgear, but again, same thing, white shirt, red skirt, stripes. Hamar people, and this looks extremely similar to Mizo people. So yeah, again, the same things. I won't repeat it for every single slide, but we see all the same features. The Taoi, I don't know, I've always liked this picture. It just looks like they're gonna go to the beach or something. They're having a good time. But yeah, we can see here Vietnam, right? So we can see what country it is. And so this is more black, of course, but again, still a lot of red the striped pattern. Katu people, a bit harder to see, but same sort of deal. All right, so before we get to Southeast Asians, let's just check the chat, see if people had to say anything. Yeah, close to China, so possibly. Yeah, that's the reason why they, have some similarities to the Chinese. Um, yeah, personally, even though this is a very small group, the total population would probably not be over like 20 million. The reason I had so many is just this is one of my favorite styles of clothing and a lot of good pictures, so that's why I included all these. Another thing we see right here is also that like none of them were wearing shoes, probably because of the climate. Okay, and so now we can move on to the more general Southeast Asian category. So Southeast Asian clothing was, of course, very similar to Northeast Indian clothing, with the only main difference really being that the sarongs would be ankle length all the time, nearly always striped, and would be worn by both genders. And so here we saw the men weren't really wearing the sarongs, whereas there the men do as well. However, some men would also wear trousers. One thing that was unique to Southeast Asian clothing was the wearing of a sash called the zbai, which went from one shoulder diagonally to the waist, and this was common amongst nearly all people in this style. And sometimes footwear would be worn, but that was not generally the case. So let's look at some examples. So Thai Lue. Keep in mind, there's a lot of groups called the Thai, but this isn't to be confused with the Thai people of Thailand. Although a lot of these Thai TAI people also live in Thailand. Um, so yeah, pretty similar as we can see, except they're wearing turbans essentially. Kamti. I mean, you can tell very much from this background that this is in Southeast Asia. And I remember for the longest time when I first saw this picture, I kind of was wondering, was like, did something weird looked or something look weird about her face? And then I realized it's probably like not painted, but something was put on her face to make it look lighter. Because it's definitely a different color from her hands or her feet here. Um, and so yeah, we can see this zbai being worn here, right? It's going from the shoulder to the waist and then sort of draping over. And yeah, once again, the sarong. Okay, then we got the Bamar people, and so these are the main people in Myanmar or Burma. So Burma was named after the Bamar people. So we see a whole family, and we can see the man is also wearing the sarong. The Rakhine people, so they live in the Rakhine state, I believe, of Myanmar, which is next to the Indian Ocean. We can see again the man's wearing a sarong. The woman is too, hers is a bit tighter and she's wearing this zbai, but kind of the same thing. Here we have the Malay people, one of the most, I guess, important groups in the region, right? Because they're not just in Malaysia, but also a lot of them live in Indonesia. So we have two pictures. This shows women and children. Again, they are wearing the sarong, and whereas the men, they also are wearing some kind of skirt, but underneath it, they're wearing trousers. And they have this very unique, interesting kind of headgear that they wear. And we can see that they're all wearing this zbai as well. This guy, and this guy. And then they use it to hold some daggers. Let's check back on the chat real quick. Okay, nothing's going on in the chat. Okay, Cham people, so they mainly live, I believe, in southern Vietnam. So pretty similar. Mandaris, they're in Indonesia. Mamasa. I always thought this picture looked pretty cool, and she has a very elaborate kind of headdress going on over here. Lampung, so they also live in Indonesia, I believe more western Indonesia. And we can see again sort of the stripe patterns that are very common in the use of a lot of necklaces. Okay, and so that's it for Southeast Asia. Now we're going to get the Thai Kadai people. So first of all, let's give a bit of a context about the Thai Kadai people. Thai Kadai basically are an ethno-linguistic group who mainly live in Thailand and Laos, but also some can be found in the neighboring areas of Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar. And so yeah, we'll see some examples of that. So yeah, Thai Kadai clothing was similar to other Southeast Asian clothing, but was more standardized, featuring a two-piece outfit consisting of a shirt, that was usually white or light colored, paired with a sarong that was not too elaborately decorated. And this abaya would sometimes be worn over the shirt, but it wasn't super common. Also, one thing you'll notice among these people is that the women would always wear their hair in a bun, and they did not wear shoes. Okay, so we'll just go back to chat to see if what's going on there. All right, so we start here with the Shan people. Um, so yeah, we see the very long sarong going down to the ankles here. Again, her face is sort of more painted white, and a pretty nice background too. I quite like this picture. Then we get to the actual Thai people, and so of course very similar sarong, and then you'll notice all the women have their hair tied in a bun. But then also you'll notice it looks quite different from what this man is wearing, and that's because this was the king of Thailand who sort of introduced Western clothing. I'm trying to remember what his name was. But this sort of became like an unofficial suit worn in the Thai royal court, after the introduction of Western customs. So that's why it sort of looks similar. You have sort of breech-looking things, the European style of shoes, the shirt, right? But this was what would have been more commonly worn every day. And again, quite a nice picture. You get the Phuan people, not exactly sure, but I believe they live in Thailand as well. See the same thing, this bai and the hair in a bun. And she also has a nice bag. And we see the same kind of textile pattern as well. Here on her dress as well. And yeah, I've always liked this picture. Thought it looked nice. You get the Lao people. These are the main people in Lao. And again, same kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but whoever is taking photographs of the people all did a great job. These are all very good photographs. Then the Isan people, and they live mainly in, I think, just the state of Isan or something like that, and that's in northeastern Thailand. So we can see their hairstyle is a bit more elaborate, but it's still tied back with a lot of jewelry, and again, the long sarongs and then no shoes over there. Okay, now we get the Khmer people. So these are basically the main people in Cambodia. And so they would wear the sampot, or a long cloth worn around the lower body, or the sampot chongkben, which was um, yeah, another wraparound cloth that was more like a trouser. So this bai originally was worn just to cover the breast because women started off going topless, but then this increasingly became unacceptable, especially with the introduction of Buddhism. And then gold would also be worn specifically on the hats that they wore, which were very tall and often pointy. And then there would also be anklets that were worn instead of shoes around the feet. So we are going to look at an example, right? So this is very unique and different. So again, they have this very interesting kind of headdress, a lot of gold, you know, gold hats, gold colored stuff, a lot of necklaces. And we see the very thick, actually, gold anklets that are being worn here. And yeah, this is interesting because these sort of look like trousers, but also skirts. So yeah, Khmer clothing is some of the most unique and interesting in the world, I think. Then behind here, you can also see the man a little bit. But yeah, it almost looks like they have a temple on their head. Okay, let's see. Southeast Asia is a beautiful region. Southeast Asian languages are ugly. Don't really know. Like, I've never really heard any Southeast Asian languages other than Tagalog, so it's hard to say. Local bartender here is Khmer. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so let's continue now. Now we're getting, oh, there we go. Great transition to Filipino clothing. All right, so Filipino clothing obviously is very similar to other Southeast Asian clothing, with the sarong being worn, although it could vary in length from either knee length to nearly floor length. And it was pretty much always red, so again, a lot of similarities to Northeast Indian clothing, and was striped with black and white stripes being the most common. Shirts would be quite decorated, but tended to be more simple. Men would have either worn a bahag, or a type of loincloth or trousers, which were influenced by both local and Spanish culture. Now, shoes would not have been worn, and hats sometimes would be worn, with an example being the salakot, or a traditional headgear that is cone-shaped with tassels, beads, and feathers, sometimes used on the rim. And this, in fact, inspired the British pith helmet. And I'm not sure exactly how the British came into contact with this. They did occupy the Philippines for like a couple of years, but yeah, maybe that was when it happened in the Seven Years' War. But I should mention that Filipino clothing was not universally worn across the Philippines, but instead, this is what was most commonly worn at the very north and very south of the archipelago. All right, so the Igorot, for example, they live in the very north of the country. And again, this is sort of what I was talking about, right? The sort of shorter sarong being worn here. And again, we see the same thing, red with a lot of stripes. The Ibaloi also live in the north on the island of Luzon. And we can see here that the man is also wearing a loincloth. So these are actually two separate cloths. This isn't a shirt of any kind. Cebuano, so they live on the island of Cebu. And we can see that the man here is wearing trousers. So trousers were sometimes worn, whereas the woman is wearing a skirt. But we can see neither of them are wearing shoes. Then the Iranun, and I always thought this picture was quite cool, especially with the very long and unique nails here made out of gold, the very cool headdress, and then the extremely long skirt that went all the way down to the floor. And even the belt actually is quite cool. The Bland, so they have, again, ankle length skirt here, very cool shirt, a lot of embroidery and decorations. Tedurai, so again, we see the man here is wearing trousers. Also, we see the men have a variety, or both have a variety of headgear. So we see this, for example, this, this. It's quite a lot of variation there. I always thought this picture was cool, the yakan. It almost looks like it's like the backdrop of the pyramids in Egypt or somewhere, but or not, the pyramids, but inside. But yeah, very cool face paint. And I'm not sure if this is meant to hold a knife. It could be. But yeah, she sort of has this skirt here and then underneath the trousers. And again, we see no shoes over here. And so yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, and so that's it for the Philippines. Just gonna check the chat real quick, and then I will keep going. Philippines is separate, yes. Okay, now the Iban people. The Iban people were very known for having this extremely decorated kind of hairstyle, mainly made out of, I think, silver or some other kind of metal. And so, yeah, we can see it right here. Very elaborate headdress, along with a lot of bracelets all around here. And then even a bunch of, yeah, metal things worn around the waist and underneath the waist with all these little gold metal plates. So yeah, we see that here. She has even more of them. Yeah, same thing there, the bracelets, and then the headgear. So it's pretty cool. And then they also have this cool thing. I'm not sure exactly what this is called, but it essentially covers the shoulders. And we see sort of like mid calf length skirts and then the anklets, at least for these two women. And then same thing with the Iban. In fact, this one is even more obvious. We can see she's literally just wearing a bunch of rings to cover her body all the way from her armpits down to a little bit beneath her butt. Just a whole series of rings, and then a crazy amount of bracelets too that cover her entire front arm. And even though it's hard to see, she's essentially wearing the same thing here as these people are. Then the man wears less, but he still has the loincloth, the feathers, and a couple of, necklaces and bracelets as well. All right, so that's it. Now we're going to go to Indonesian. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Indonesian. So Indonesian clothing, keep in mind this is not the clothing that was worn across most of Indonesia, but is actually mainly concentrated in Western Sumatra and some parts of Borneo and Java. And keep in mind, this is going to be the most elaborate clothing of any area in the world, with the amount of gold decoration being insane. Indonesian clothing was actually one of the few types in Asia where men only wore trousers, although it was worn with a thigh length skirt worn over it. Additionally, men nearly always wore coats or vests over their shirts, and these were often extremely embroidered and had bright dynamic colors. They would wear very decorated hats, either in the form of a mitre, or a hat that is round at the bottom and triangular at the top, or even a flat cap that is semi-round. Also, for footwear, they would wear these very unique pointed shoes that would be open at the top until halfway down the foot. So let's look at some examples. First of all, right, we start off with this thing, which is crazy. Her entire body here is decorated with jewelry, and that's like probably the most insane hat we've seen so far in this presentation. Um, so yeah, I can't even really begin to describe what this is, but you can see for yourself. She's wearing these very long, I don't know, almost nail claw looking things. And then yeah, her whole body is just decorated with all these jewels, front and back, right and left, everywhere. And then we have the Banjar people. And so here we see what I was talking about with the men. So this kind of hat, known as a bishop's hat, is called a mitre officially. You can see the man is wearing trousers. They're both wearing very cool looking shoes. And his is a lot simpler, but still has embroidery, whereas she has the very elaborate hair style, very tight sarong, and then a lot of jewelry all over her body. The Karinki, I think they're on Borneo, but I could be mistaken. But they have, again, a lot of gold that they're wearing on their head. Now, this one is probably the craziest, the Minangkabau. And I'm trying to remember what island they're from. But yeah, this, I mean, I guess it must not be too heavy, but the amount of jewelry is just insane on this, little headgear thing that they're wearing. And then, of course, a lot of jewelry all over their body too. So yeah, just imagine walking to a room full of people dressed like this, you know? It would be hard to beat them. In fact, I don't think it would be possible to beat them in terms of the amount of decoration they have here. And this one I think is so much just like over the top. Like, I mean, of course, I would argue this is also over the top, but this is crazy. Like both the man and the woman, which is pretty rare. They're both wearing this crazy crown looking thing, all this stuff over their ears, so much jewelry all over their body. You know, the amount of decoration like among Indonesian clothing is just unparalleled in the entire world. So let's see if there's any. Um, yeah, Indonesia's nice. Yeah, I think it looks pretty cool. And we got Betawi. Now this is looks a lot better. This is in Western Java, by the way, and I think this is like pretty nice, but not as extreme. So this is another example. Again, we can kind of see from the name what island this is. And the Sasak people live on an island right next to Bali. So again, this is much more toned down, but you still see some of the same features. Aceh. So Aceh is the northwestern part of Indonesia and also like the most western part of the entire country. And we can see again the men wearing the trousers, a lot of decoration, the mitre hat, and women, again, crazy headgear, so much decoration. But it is more toned down, especially compared to like the Palembang people, for example. Sundanese, they're also in Western Java as well. Again, this seems like much more moderate. Same with the Bantenese, also same area, and you can kind of tell they're Muslims, right, by the kind of fez that they're wearing. So he's wearing a fez. This guy's also wearing a fez. She's actually wearing a hijab here. The Gayo people, which is kind of funny to say, but yeah, they also live in Sumatra. And again, we see the man once again wearing the mitre hat, the woman wearing something else. The Kluet, same kind of mitre hat that this man's wearing. A lot of decoration and embroidery, but a little less than the woman who, has all this. The Angkola, which is kind of funny, just reminds me of Angola. This actually I quite like. She has a very elaborate headdress here, but he has a cool hat. Very nice bai that he's wearing. I think this hosts some kind of knife. And yeah, very cool decoration. We have a lot of examples here just because of how elaborate this is. Mandai Ling, very similar. In fact, you can see the same kind of hat is worn by the man and by the woman. It's just that this is much more elaborate, all red, and even the hands are red, as well as the shoes, the trousers, the skirt, the shirt, everything. Nias people live on an island right off the western coast of Sumatra, and it is more toned down here, but still, we see the elaborate hairstyle. Then we have the Koma ring, and this is one of my favorite pictures for sure. I very much like the man's clothing, the trousers, the insane decoration and embroidery, as well as the hat. Of course, the background's nice suit too. And yeah, and then the woman has crazy amounts of jewelry here, and of course, especially on her head. That headdress is like over a foot tall and a foot wide. So that's quite cool. And so that's the end. Let's see people's thoughts in the chat. Oh, all right. Anyways, now we'll go over to Javanese people. So basically, in contrast to the extravagance of the Indonesian clothing style, the Javanese style was much humbler, and it basically consisted of a dress and upper garment, although the dress was unique because of the slit on the side that would allow for more movement. And this meant that undergarments, which were usually shorts, were worn just underneath the dress. Now, just like the Thai Kadai women, the Javanese woman would not or would wear their hair tied up, usually in a bun, while the men would generally wear trousers or a sarong, a shirt, and a jacket over it. And basically, just like the Malays, the Javanese would wear the sarong and the songkok for men, and then the turong for women. All right, so we'll see an example of this. So here's an example. We have the man on the left, woman on the right, and we can see in contrast to the craziness of what was going on right before, this is much simpler. Here are the Banyumasan performing the dance. Again, much more simple clothing. Siribonese, they're very famous for their mask dance, so that's why she's wearing a mask. And we can see, yeah, this is depicting a lot of outdoor wildlife scenery and very long decorations coming from the side of the head all the way down to the knees. All right, and so then that's it for that. We'll move on now to mountainous Southeast Asian clothing. And I only gave it that name because I couldn't really find a better name. But it basically was very much different from the rest of Southeast Asia and was characterized by the wearing of a full-length black dress with some embroidery down the middle. And only the hands, feet, and head would be left uncovered. So here's some examples. The Dusun people, again, as we can see, black down the middle. Murut, same thing, black down the middle. And yes, and so that's it. And so that's basically the end for Southeast Asia. And so now we're going to move to Oceania. Before I do that, let's just check the chat real quick. Okay, so I know some other people here. Comment your thoughts, and then we'll move on to Oceania now. All right, glad you enjoyed it. So let's move on to Oceania. And so we're going to start off with West Papuan. So the West Papuan, I'm telling you guys, pay attention to this one because it's actually pretty funny. So the West Papuans are most known for just wearing the koteka, also known as a penis gourd. Also, yes, warning, this is where the nudity is going to start coming out. So it's made out of a dried out gourd, which is a plant, and it was held in place by a string that was wrapped around your testicles or hips. You can also often tell the ethnicity of the user by how they wear it. And so, depending on how the gourd was worn, if it was straight up, straight out, or at an angle, All of these things would indicate your ethnicity. The shape would also indicate your status, and if it leans left, you're a general, while if it leans right, you're an aristocrat. And then if it's straight, that meant you were a virgin. Also, a stone weight was placed inside to allow the gourd to expand as something else inside there also expands. But you can use your imagination to figure that out. So actually, in 1971, Indonesia tried to introduce shorts, and dresses to these people, but instead they used the shorts as hats, and the dresses were used by the women as bags, so they didn't really get the memo. Okay, so first we have the Dani, and of course the most recognizable thing we can immediately see is the, nose kind of wearing thing. Um, I don't even know what this is called, but yeah, whatever this is, the me, um, again, quite obvious. In fact, we can see the rock on the end of the Koteka right here. And yeah, it looks quite ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, like I had a hard time trying not to laugh when I first found these pictures. But yeah, this goes pretty far up and it is held by this little string over here. Just showing the Oceanian clothing. Look at this.
Is that his penis?
Yeah, like this is the Koteka. It's called a penis gourd. This is what they would wear in West Papua, which is now part of Indonesia.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, my brother's here watching now.
So where's his penis end?
No, like it's inside here and somewhere.
It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, look at this. This is probably the most stupid type of clothing I've ever seen in my entire life. The Marind people. There's nothing I can even really say to describe this. You like
Where is
between the
that?
nose,
Papua New Guinea.
this, well, it's Papua, but Indonesian side.
So it's
This,
not there any of the Indonesians dark.
no, these are the native people to the island of Papua. The island of Papua is shared between Papua New Guinea
Yeah, I
and
know what you're talking about. But when did the Indonesians
uh, I don't know, a long time ago, but they never replaced these people here. The Dutch just took over the land.
so
Yeah, so Marinda people look probably the most clown-looking people I've ever seen. Okay, and then we move on to Australian. And Australian clothing is most notable for the use of white body paint, and usually the only kind of clothing that was worn was the loincloth for men and women. Before we look at Australian, let's see your thoughts on the beautiful West Papuan clothing, if we can even call it that. Oh, no one? All right. Well, okay, we're moving on then. So yeah, we start off with the Laurakia people, and yeah, they aren't wearing anything, just have a lot of ugly scars on their body. Wakaya people, this guy is actually the wizard or great medicine man of the Wakaya who live in Central Australia. The Kuku Yulanji, very funny name, but yeah, we can see right the white body paint and then the hands there. The Torres Strait Islanders, so they're wearing this now. I assume at the time they wouldn't have worn anything except the actual grass skirt, but yeah, the Torres Strait Islanders wore the Darkin Jung. I actually think this picture looks pretty cool. It looked kind of epic. Here we have the Gandangara. And again, very dramatic pose. So that's why I kept this one here. The Karna. So this was an old warrior. And this is almost like a boomerang. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it was, but we can see he's just wearing this kind of animal hide over his lower body, and that's it. And so, yeah, this is the easiest part of the presentation because there's not much to describe. The Kaitetje, again, we can see the ritual scarring that's going on here. Okay, and now we're going to move on to Oceanian clothing. Oh, welcome, welcome. Okay, before we move on to Oceanian, because I do want to get some comments on West Papuan clothing. So, Sir Welch, did you see the part on West Papuan clothing? Respond in the chat so that I know. And if not, I'll go back. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so warning, there is some nudity, but we are going to go back to West Papuan clothing. Okay, so just in general for all the Oceanian peoples, um, it's kind of all the same, very low clothing, but yeah, West Papuans in particular have the most insane clothing. So already we have the Dani, um, who have this very strange thing going around their face. The Mi people, and yeah, let's just soak in a little bit what's going on here. This thing over here is called the koteka or penis gourd, and it's held by just one little string around the waist. And yeah, the shape and the direction it's going in would indicate your social status. And yeah, also rocks would be placed inside to expand the size of the gourd. So yeah, this is literally all they wore. And then for the most goofy looking person in this entire presentation, the Marind people, and I cannot even start to describe what I'm looking at here, between the nose, whatever's being worn around the neck here, and then, this little thing. Some of the craziest things I've seen of any kind of clothing in the world, if it can even be called that. So yeah, comment your thoughts in the chat and then we'll move on to the rest of Oceanian clothing. Oh no, Indonesia's taking the independence of West Papua. Good. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not the kind of person to be like, oh, these people are super primitive or whatever, but these people actually were primitive. And yeah, I don't know if you saw them. The Indonesian government actually started like distributing normal clothes to these people, like trousers and skirts and whatever, and they literally wore them as like bags and hats. Like the men started wearing the trousers as hats. So, yeah. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Yeah, okay. So glad you found that funny. So now let's move on to Oceanian clothing. So this is Australian once again. Okay, so Oceanian clothing was most recognizable for the use of grass skirts, which were worn by both genders all across the continent's many islands. And they were usually the only thing worn by both men and women, meaning that they would go topless. Now keep in mind when I say Oceania, I basically just mean all the countries except Australia, because we already had our separate category for Australia. You start off with a Huli, and this is one of the coolest looking guys I've ever seen, just because he's, both cool and intimidating. He definitely has something going through his nose. I can't really tell what that is. He has the face painting, the body painting, the epic beard, and the cool hat. So this is just one of the coolest and most striking pictures I've ever seen. You got the Yatmul, and they have a crazy kind of mask that they wear with this whole, round thing all around their head. And again, this is what we're talking about, the grass skirt. We see the grass skirt being worn here. And the Tahitian people who live on the island of Tahiti, which is part of France now. And yeah, we can see very obviously the grass skirts, the interesting headgear, and then for more normal occasions, the men are just wearing short loincloths, the women are wearing, dresses that go basically up to the knee. All right, and then that's it. And now we're going to move to North America. So final thoughts on this, and then we'll go to North America. Tahiti's rightful Wolcodian territory. All right, guys, so let's move on now to the Americas. Okay, so before I continue any further, I am going to be showing the because this is a traditional clothing. I'm going to be showing the clothing only of the Native American people. And the reason why is because the clothing of the Europeans in the Americas is very similar to the clothing of just the Europeans. And we already went through the European clothing, so there's kind of no point in showing the clothing of the European Americans. So we're going to be showing the actual Native Americans. So, of course, we're starting off with the Inuit at the very north. Now, Inuit clothing was very similar to Siberian clothing, and I don't know if any of you guys remember the Siberian clothing from the last stream, but yeah. But of course, this is due to a similar climate and because the Inuit people came from Siberia. So common items would be heavy fur coats, which went down to the waist for men and to the knee for women, which came along with a fur-lined hood. Then the coat would usually be a simple color, with the most common ones being either white, black, gray, or brown. Then underneath this coat would be worn trousers and very thick boots. So here's an example, the Greenlandic Inuit. Now, it does take a genius to figure out what part of the world they live in. And yeah, this is actually one of my favorite kinds of clothing I've seen. Very nice patterns, very colorful, especially this part and this part. And even the boots look quite nice. So I'm quite a big fan of Greenlandic Inuit clothing. Okay, moving on. Now we get to Arctic. So Arctic, by what I mean by this, is the kind of clothing that was basically worn um, in northern Canada, but was not worn by the Inuit. So it was actually very remarkably similar to European clothing, with men wearing shirts and trousers and women wearing ankle-length dresses. Women would also cover their hair with a veil or scarf, while men would often have a vest over their shirt, and both of these would wear soft shoes. Let's look at some examples. So here are the Tlicho, or however the heck you pronounce this. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce half these letters, but it looks like an I, L, and O. So, that's just how I'm going to pronounce it. And again, right, if it wasn't for how this woman looked, you'd probably think this was just like European women. But yeah, Tlicho, Northern Canada, the Innu, and again, the Innu are close to the Inuit, but they live in Quebec, I believe. So we can see again very similar clothing to Europeans. Okay, and so that's it for that. And now we're going to move to the Pacific Northwest. So Pacific Northwest clothing was most recognizable for their button blankets, which are worn over the upper body. And these usually had totemic symbols, often stylized animals or faces, and they often served as symbols of clan histories, duties, and rights, as well as a marker of one's identity. Among their clothing, red and black were the most common colors both for the blanket and the everyday clothes. And underneath the blanket, a long shirt with similar clothing would be worn, which often extended down to the thighs and knees. And underneath this would be worn trousers. For headgear, a variety of headgear would be worn, which would come in the form of small round hats with an open top, or a tall rounded hat, but the most common hat was a cone-shaped straw hat, which was round at the bottom and most square on the top. Clothing would be relatively unisex, but trousers would be more common for men. And shoes were sometimes worn, but this was not always the case. So here's some examples. So we have the Simshan, and these are in British Columbia. Well, it's actually racist to call it British Columbia. Well, yeah, sorry. Anyway, so we can see again the obvious totemic symbols that are on all of these men's shirts. We see the blankets that, one, two, at least two of them are wearing, and to some extent, all of these guys are wearing some kind of blanket. And yeah, these are sort of stylized mythical animals. We see the very interesting kind of hat that they're wearing, the trousers, and then the shoes. The Nisga, which again, this guy looks almost exactly the same as this guy. And we can see again the blanket with the long, very long tassels and the same kind of imagery here. This is actually was taken in Vancouver, BC, which is where I live most of the year. The quinault. So this is much simpler, but we see the color red being worn here, and again the long overcoats. The Haida people, they also live in British Columbia, and this was kind of the hat that I was talking about. Sort of more round at the top. Well, they're both round, but I guess more of a cone shaped at the top and more round at the bottom. So wearing a huge nose ring. So it shows you that British Columbians were liberals even back then. And then again, the big, um, coat with the long tassels. The Klamath people, they lived in Oregon.
Are you talking?
I'm doing a stream.
Huh?
I'm doing a stream.
Okay. And is anyone paying you to do that?
Uh,
Is that going to generate any revenue?
just give me a second.